fucking cancerous. But hey, no risk now. So
there you go. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So this is how it's going to go. Each person is going to get a 7-minute opening statement, hour to hour and 30 cross-examination, 7-minute closing statement, and then my questions and then audience questions. Seeing as we can give Destiny some time to recoup his thoughts. Stentz, do you want to open for us?
I don't think Destiny's got an opening statement, so I don't think it's super fair to throw me the 7-minute time there. I'll just let him say whatever he wants for his bit, and I'll just like respond a bit.
Gotcha. Nice. Okay.
Is that okay with you, Pedro? You're the moderator.
Yeah, for sure. If you guys both want to hand over the 7 minutes, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. All right. Well, gentlemen, the floor is open. Have at it.
All right. Could I ask I know your initial prescription was like having a third category, right, for transgender sports specifically. Now it seems like you moved away from that. Am I correct on that? Is there like a new prescription you have?
No, I think a third category is probably necessary. Well, it'd be a third and fourth category, right, for trans women and trans men.
Okay, I thought I saw you on stream saying that you thought there should be like an open category and like a protected cis women's category. Is that like...
I might have said that before, but it doesn't make sense because like in an open category, trans women will never be competitive and trans men will never be competitive. So at that point, you might as well just have no trans sports at all, right? I think you need probably a protected space for trans people to do sports in.
Okay, so at like a state level, do you think there's even like the numbers there for that? This is the concern I have with that proposal.
I don't know if the numbers are there for it, but that's not really relevant because whether the numbers are there or not for it doesn't justify destroying cis women's sports.
So I don't think that I think it is relevant for specifically the prescription you're making. If the numbers aren't there for it, then the prescription just doesn't work at all, right? Like if the numbers aren't there for it, then we just can't have this prescription.
I mean, then I guess we don't have trans sports. If it ends up being the case for that, then sure.
Do you think that as it exists now that trans women in sports are like overrepresented at all, or do you think there's too many of them there? Or do you just think it will become the case in the future?
I'm not really concerned with any of those questions. It's more just like, is there an unfair categorical advantage that the categorization is supposed to avoid? And it seems like the answer, where all the research has been pointing towards so far, is a resounding yes. I don't know if there's an overrepresentation because I don't even know if we know 100% what the actual number of trans people in society is. And then how does that drill down to how many go to school? And then how does that drill down to how many like compete in sports? So I don't know what the answer to that is.
Sure. So if it's not the case that there's like an overrepresentation, then like letting trans women into women's sports isn't going to like destroy the sports, right? It might just be like even if we grant the idea that all trans women categorically have a huge advantage, there'd still be like cis women playing sports, wouldn't there?
No, it would destroy the competitive integrity of the sport.
Okay, the competitive integrity. When you say the competitive integrity, are you talking about the ability for people to compete with like based on their I'm not sure what to call it, skilled outside of like the biological advantages they might have?
Well, right now sports, for cis women's sports, there is a boundary set so that only people that are, I guess, women, broadly speaking, are allowed to participate. So the competitive integrity would be ensuring that only women are allowed to participate. Within the category of woman, there's a broad range of different biological features. So, I mean, it's not separated more precisely there, except for when you get into sports to do like weight classes. But
do you think that trans women fit within the category of woman?
For the purposes of this discussion, no, of course not. That's why they're trans women, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's like of course not, right? Like they're trans women, right? But like this is just like an adjective we're trying to. If
trans women were just women, we wouldn't have to worry about.
I'm just trying to get your opinion. I'm not trying to like pressure you on it.
No, I understand, but we wouldn't have to talk about like HRT or surgeries or anything. They would just be women and problem solved. Like yay, we solved all trans issues by saying that they're the same, but clearly they're not, right? That's why we have all these issues related to trans women, like getting healthcare and gender affirming care and everything like that, right?
So I don't think it's accurate to say that because of the fact that they need certain healthcare that's like special to them that they're not women, right? I still think that like even though trans women have special healthcare needs, they can still be categorized into the group of women in the same way that like a woman who needs like an appendectomy would still be part of like the category of women, right?
But we're not talking about an appendectomy. We're talking about getting hormones that bring you in line with resembling a biological sex, right? An appendectomy is
no, I agree. Yeah.
Well, no, hold on, wait, no, we don't agree. There's saying that like trans women are women. Like, imagine somebody says to you, like, man, I feel like I have a lot of gender dysphoria. And you're like, oh, well, what's wrong? It's like, well, I feel like I'm a woman stuck in a man's body. It's like, oh, well, does that make you a trans woman? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, oh, well, guess what? Trans women are women. There you go. You solved it. Like, doesn't make any sense.
No, right? That's not the proposal that's not the proposal that I'm advocating for. I understand that there are certain things that make like trans women dysphoric, and right, there are like medical necessities there. I just don't think that this like excludes them from the category of women.
It's just like a pointless, like we're not arguing about the broader social category of women. We're talking about like people. Do you believe that you can identify as trans without having surgery, or are you like a trans medicalist? Do you think that you can be trans and not go for HRT or surgery?
I think you can be trans without dysphoria and not go for like HRT or surgery. Sure.
Okay, do you think that a trans person?
I don't think it's the most useful thing in the world, but I think it's possible. Yeah.
Sure, but do you think a trans person that doesn't go through HRT or surgery should be allowed to compete in cis women's sports?
In cis women's sports, I think if the point of cis women's sports is to, I guess it depends on which sport, right? There are some of them that I think is fine for, and there's some that I think it would be issuesome to let people who have like these massive biological advantages, regardless of gender identity, competing with each other because they could kill the other competitor, right? Like in combat sports.
No, not so like in basketball, volleyball, and everything else, you think it's okay, or?
In basketball,
wait. Actually, I'm just gonna
go ahead.
That was the most non-answer.
Sure,
ever, okay? Do you think that?
I thought it was like a direct answer to your question.
It wasn't. Do you think that trans women that don't have any hormone replacement therapy or any surgeries should be allowed to compete alongside cis women in athletic events?
I just said that it depends on the sport. That is absolutely a direct answer to your question.
Okay, can you name any sport that anybody here has ever heard of that you would be okay with that happening in?
Sure, I think there are lots of endurance sports where I'd be okay with that happening, right? Where like men and women don't compete on like wildly different levels. Like long distance swimming seems fine.
So men outcompete women on almost all endurance sports. I think there's like two niche, like I think like in ultra marathons, and I think in one thing, but in every other mainstream sport, basketball, volleyball, soccer in America, and every other thing, men are outcompeting women. So in any of those sports, not combat sports, but in any other sports that everybody watches and has heard of, do you think that men should be allowed to compete? Not men. Do you think that trans women that don't get HRT or surgery should be allowed to compete against cis women?
So I think that one of the things you said just wasn't true. In the case of like ultra long distance, like running, it is the case like women not only like compete at the same level as men, they outperform men in many cases. So I don't think that's really super accurate there.
In the cases of non-endurance sports, and not just talking about only combat sports, do you think that trans women that don't go through HRT or have any surgeries should be allowed to compete against cis women?
As it currently exists, no, but I think it would be good to eventually remove the gender categories from sports. This is like obviously a long-term goal.
Okay, so if you say no to that, why couldn't I just ask you, well, don't you think those trans women are women?
I do think they're women. Yeah, I don't think the categories as they currently exist should be based on the if you're a woman or not. I don't think it's women's sports, right? I think they should be based on like we're trying to it should be based on the utility it serves, right? And I think that utility is going to be the ability to pull people in who are in this who are in this sort of like generally group that is like pushed out of sports in general, right? Which would be like I think it's cis women are still kind of a bit pushed out of sports. I think trans women are pretty hardline pushed out of sports. And I think the social utility of giving them a place where they can play sports is good.
Women are pushed out of sports when we have like specific federal provisions that guarantees funding across states for women's sports, even when they don't make any money for the school.
Well, wouldn't it be like a more of a cultural push? I think there's like a lot of like pull factors as well. I'm not disagreeing with that, but there's like there's a cultural push that I think a lot of women are told like I don't actually know if it's a lot of women, but there are at least some women who are told like that they shouldn't be competing in sports.
This sounds like a very weird, like ultra progressive delusion. I think plenty of women are encouraged to participate in sports when they go to high school. It might not be like football, like men do, but I think plenty of women are encouraged to play sports. I don't think that it's the idea that they're telling them all to get in the kitchen and cook. I don't agree.
So, well, I guess we could dispute this point all day, but I don't think it's really relevant to my broader point. So yeah, I'm even okay with just granting the point entirely. Like women aren't pushed out of sports. Okay, so what's the point of women's sports?
To have a protected place for cis women to compete with other cis women.
What's the point of having a protected space for cis women to compete with other cis women if they're not pushed out of sports?
Because women aren't capable generally of competing with the male biology.
Yeah. So what's the point in having them in sports?
So that they have an opportunity to compete, because it represents a huge section of society that probably would like to compete in athletic events.
Okay, so do you think that there are people there's a huge section of society who's just like not fit enough as well? Like if there was like if it was just skill based and we had the same total number of people in sports.
You have the capacity to get fit enough to be at least like playing in games and stuff. Yeah,
there are a lot of people who just don't have that capacity, I think, right?
I mean, if you're talking about disabilities, that we literally have the Paralympics or whatever, right? Paralympics,
like short men playing in basketball. Well, I mean, I don't think we should be.
Certain physiologies won't be able to compete in certain sports, sure. But I mean, like most people,
like people who are like shorter on average probably couldn't play at like a sport that people who are shorter on average would have a lot of trouble playing in a sport that's like requires you to be very tall, like basketball.
Potentially, yeah, there might be certain sport or like people with longer torsos. I already talked about Michael Phelps or whatever might be able to
Sure.
compete better at swimming. Sure, that's possible. Yeah, it's not.
Well,
Gonna
this
be
is the case for
perfect.
every sport, right? Like every sport's going to have like some things that are biological advantages that like some people just aren't going to have, right? That are going to push them out of sports entirely.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the same would apply to them. So we don't give them a space in sports, right? Because there's no like social discrimination against them, right?
Well, I just think we don't give specific heights of space in sports because we probably don't like group people generally by height. It's not a thing we think about, right? Like we have like men and women are broadly recognized as two distinct groups in society. I don't think we have like groups in society of like 5'7" men and like 4'9" women.
We don't have. I guess. I mean, we do. It'd just be the group of 4'9" or like 5'7" men and 4'9" women, right? That would just be like short people. I agree that there's not like a in the case of sports, we don't do that, right? But this is kind of irrelevant to the broader point here.
Okay, where is this? Where are we going to with this point? I guess.
Yeah, we're talking about how should we structure sports, and you're saying like this is not the way we currently structure sports. Like I agree, it's not the way we currently structure sports.
Are you asking me
That's
to
not the point.
rebuild like the entire sports system to make it 100% like meritocratic, or?
I think slowly over time, making the sports system meritocratic as a long-term goal is a really good idea. But I think currently, as it stands, I don't think the categories are that harmful. I don't think that the allowing trans women in sports at the rates they do are in any way keeping cis women from going into sports entirely. And I don't think it like destroys the competitive nature of sports to allow trans women in there. I don't think they have even though I would grant they have an advantage, I don't think they have enough of an advantage to justify like keeping them out and like putting them into a third category that just wouldn't really work mathematically.
How can you how can you justify the division of sports by sex and then allow people into the sport that kind of like work against that established boundary?
So I think that you can.
Sports should just be gotten rid of entirely.
I said long distance. I'm okay with like moving it to a genderless system of sports.
Well,
right?
I'm
like
not talking in a hypothetical
yeah.
in 500 years or whatever. Like,
not 500 years, like, but slowly over time, I think it's fine to do that. But I don't.
You're talking about
unless you could give me
You're talking about getting rid of all. I'm
not
asking
really
for today. Okay, how long until we live in a genderless society? When do you think? I'm curious.
I don't think we're going to live in a genderless society just because we have genderless sports. It's a bit exaggerative, right?
No. I don't think you
think society would be genderless if we had genderless sports?
To get rid of all gendered sports? Yeah, I think you're in a very utopian society. I don't know how you can think otherwise.
I think you can still have gender roles in society without having like gender roles specifically in sports. It's like a very small subsection of society, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're talking about eliminating like women from sports. I think we're pretty far from that. If you talk about getting rid of genders in sports, you're talking about
not talking about eliminating women from sports. None of us are talking. Neither of us talk about eliminating women from sports.
How do they still compete if we eliminate like the gender distinction?
They would compete at lower skill levels.
So you could never be the top at any sport. Now you're just going to be relegated to always being like the fourth division because you're a woman.
If you're, I guess you could be you could be the top of D4. They're never the top of any sport, anyways, right?
Well, they are. They can be the top. They can be the best woman in the world at a sport.
Yeah, the best woman at a world sport is not the kind of thing that most people are going to consider the best at the sport, right?
They would say that they're the best woman at the sport, recognizing that, like, yeah, women have.
They could still be the best woman at the sport.
Yeah, but if they're all in the same leagues, you don't see how that's a little different.
I agree, it's a little different. It just doesn't really like address the point.
Do you not see there being a distinction between saying that like we have a women's league and there can be some women that are at the top of that league versus we just have an open league and the best woman happens to be like ranked 7,000 in that league? You don't think that feels a little bit different to the women that compete?
I think it does feel a bit different. Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think it would be the feelings of this woman, I don't think are enough to outweigh the social benefit of being able to not have segregations on the ground of sex.
The feeling of every woman, right? There will never be a woman at the top of any sport ever again. You will never have a female champion.
We already don't have women at the top of any sport. We have them at the top of women's sports, right? So
sure. Which is their own.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, the top of the divisions that they play in, which are like the women's divisions. Yeah, you have the best female athletes that play against other female athletes. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, you have the best female athletes playing against other female athletes currently. I think that the saying that they're the worseness they'll feel because of the fact that they're like playing against competitors who are winning against them in specific competitions, and they're no longer going to be the best in any sport. I don't think this is enough to justify the social harms that keeping trans women out of sports has.
So you think that the social harms against all women competitors, that now you're going to have women in their mid-20s, late 20s that have been competitive their whole life, are going up against getting crushed by high school player boys. They're going to be competing in the same divisions. You're talking about never having another woman on TV ever for no college games, no professional games. There is no more WNBA, and nobody wants to watch. No offense, I'm sorry for NCAA players. Nobody's going to watch like Division III football. Does that even happen? I don't even know if these games are televised, right? Like, so you're talking about
I have no idea, but
so you think that harm against all fucking like cis
I don't
women?
I don't think it's the case that we'll like never ever like there are women who are kicking at D1 levels. We'll see those women, right? On TV.
Against
I think
men?
they're going to be some. They are kicking at D1 levels. I'm not sure what you mean by against men.
They're kicking at D1 level. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I guess it doesn't really matter. They're women who we will likely see televised.
I don't know
we'll see
what
them
that
in
means.
a smaller number.
Can you
I agree.
explain what that means? I don't know what kicking at the D1 level means.
It means that like at like the Division 1 levels, they're kicking like on par or like near the lower range of like Division 1 kickers.
A kicker in what sport?
I guess in football.
Wait, what do you mean you guess? Wait, what are we talking about right now?
Look, I have no idea how this relates to the broader point. I'm going to be honest with you. What is? I feel like I'm missing something. What are you trying to go with?
I don't know what you're saying. I'm very confused. I'm having a schizo moment. You're saying that there are some women that are competitive with men at D1 levels? In any sport that anybody watches?
Not broadly. Very small subsections of the things you can do in a sport. Yes. Not the entire sport overall, right? I agree. We will see less women in sports. We're in like high level sports that we see televised, right? We could see the same number of women overall.
Almost, like the number is going to be approaching zero. I don't want you to weasel out like, oh, maybe there'll only be like 20 or 30. The number will be approaching zero. Maybe you get like one exceptional woman every couple years that makes it into some televised matches. But for the most part, they're going to be completely eliminated.
Most people don't pay, but as it exists now, most people don't pay too much attention to women's sports. They're already viewed as like the lower league.
Okay, so if I were to look up broadcast numbers for like the all females like soccer or the WNBA, do you think it's just like a few dozen people watching these? Do you don't think
I'm sure that it's more than just a few dozen people, but I think if we look at the numbers overall, it's going to be a very small percent.
Yeah, it's less than what watch men's sports, but there are people that watch like women's sports, especially women. Like,
so I don't think that it's as nearly as large as the number of people who watch men's sports, including women, right? Even if we looked at just women, I would assume that like less of them would be watching women's sports. If we look at people overall, it's definitely the case. The less watch women's sports.
But I mean, like, I know that women's soccer has gotten larger against Europe. There are like women's like
wait, that's not a maybe. You're accusing me of weaseling out, but that's definitely not a maybe, right? We both know that's true.
That more women watch men's sports than women's sports?
That the viewer count for men's sports is wildly higher than women's sports.
It's for sure higher, but you're making it sound like nobody watches women's sports, right? There are like huge celebrities that everybody knows. Like everybody knows.
I never said nobody watches it. I just think it's a very small number of people who already watch it.
Okay, there were 82 million viewers of the Women's Cup final for football, for soccer. Okay, so there are people that watch women's sports.
For soccer. You said there are
82 million.
Yeah, no,
people.
I didn't say there were no people. You're just strawmanning me here. I didn't say there were no people who watch it.
Those 82 million viewers that are watching all women compete are now non-existent. They're going to be watching men compete because you're eliminating that.
Men's sports received 96.3% of airtime, with women's sports 1.6%. Gender neutral topics 2.1%. So it's just not a maybe. It's just a yes. Like just women's sports are watched less. This isn't like a hot take.
I'm not disagreeing with you. You're making it sound like it's basically irrelevant.
I'm not sure what you mean by basically irrelevant.
It sounds like you're basically saying that like not that many people watch women's sports, so if we get rid of it, we're not losing much anyway.
No, I'm not saying that if we got rid of it entirely, we're not losing much anyways. I'm saying that like not that many people watch women's sports, so having this like mixed division, I don't think it would lead to a huge decrease in the number of like, I don't know, like female celebrity athletes. I think people would still like trend around them, and they still like give them sponsorships, etc. We might even see like more people watching these lower rank. We might even see more people watching these like lower ranking sports than we did before.
So somebody like Serena Williams, she wouldn't exist anymore. Nobody would know who the fuck she is, right? She would be some random like rank 500 tennis player. I mean, she'd be the best woman, but like nobody would know.
If she's the best woman in the sport, right? Serena Williams, people will care and like notice that.
How do you know?
Because I think it's like, obviously we can't know anything about the future, right? But I think it's pretty reasonable to say like being the number one women's player, there are a lot of people who are going to care about that in and of itself and be like, wow, this is a exceptional woman at this sport, and I'm going to give her exceptional amounts of attention despite the fact that she's not the best at the sport. I think this will still happen. She's not going to get like, she's not going to make it to any teams. There's not going to be anybody televising those matches. There's not going to be like, who's looking to sponsor
I mean, like, I only have my first-hand experience only in esports, so maybe it's different in sports. But like, who the fuck in esports sponsors like the 1,000th best player? Like, nobody's on these teams, or if there are these teams, people get paid like $20.
Is the 1,000th best player in esports like the? I don't really know about esports. Is it like the number one woman in esports is like the 1,000th best player?
It's probably close to that. There's like a couple of standout women because it's a lot less physically demanding, but for the most part, it's like 99.
Plenty of people are sponsoring them, right? Like the top woman player that you can think of in esports. I'm sure
the biggest places where women get recognition are like in all women's leagues. Is how it used to go for CS:GO.
You think that the top female esports players are like they're not getting any attention? I know in chess they do, right? The top chess players and top women's chess players get lots of attention.
Chess has women's divisions.
They have women's FIDE master rankings, which I think should probably also be gotten rid of. They're kind of a silly rank, right?
Why?
Right. Because I don't think it helps women to say like, here's the equivalent of the man's ranking, but it's like a really low ELO and it's like worse at chess. I think it's like kind of not helpful.
Because it's hard for women to compete in some of these things. Like,
why is it hard for them to compete?
For a number of physiological reasons. That depends on the sport.
At chess?
What you want to talk about? It potentially, maybe.
What is the physiological reason for why it's hard for them to compete at chess?
It seems like neurologically the way the boys engage with things might be a little bit different than the way the girls engage with things. I don't know. It could be.
It's different, but why are they worse at chess?
If your position here is that you win if I can't exactly detail you the neurological processes by which men are able to manipulate video games.
No, that's not my position. I just want you to.
You've totally beat me. All I'm saying is that broadly speaking,
I'm not trying to gotcha you here. I just want to understand your position better.
When you look at the history of things like video games, you look at the history of things like chess, it seems like men are way more competitive in these arenas than women are, such that women are not competitive at the highest levels. It might be the case. Do you think that maybe it's all socialization,
social pressure?
But it could be. But if you eliminate all the women's spaces for them right now, then women just disappear. They cease to exist in these spaces.
I don't think so. I think that if you eliminate women's spaces there, I think a lot of the socialization, a lot of that social pressure, I think it even mitigates some of the social pressure in things like chess, for example, where the women players who are like, obviously women on average have higher IQs. I don't think it's unlikely that women players will still be competing in chess and even doing so more so now that they're not viewed as like second class chess players, for example.
Women can go and compete with men right now if they want.
No, I agree.
In any sport, women can do this.
Oh, I agree. But in the case of like things like women's FIDE Master and like these specific women's only leagues in chess, I don't think they do any good. I think they do harm.
So, but all the women that are getting any recognition or doing anything there would just cease to exist in your world. They would go compete with men. They'd lose to middling, not even grandmasters, and then they'd just be done.
No, I don't think they'd be just done. I think that women would still be competing in chess. Like you said, they already do compete, right? In like the open matches in chess. They do compete with men. Yes, they do.
My understanding is that at the highest levels of chess, when you're talking about like grandmasters and stuff, it's almost impossible for women to be competitive at these levels. Can somebody in chat fact check me if I'm wrong? That's my understanding, is that at the highest levels of chess, it's very, 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 very hard for any woman to be competitive.
So it's hard for women to be competitive is very different from your initial claim, which was like there are not women players who are playing at these high levels, right? There are women who are like
someone is saying
GMs, not women's GM.
Someone is saying that the highest rated woman is 200 elo below like the highest rated man.
That would be like that would be like 2,800 or something, or 2,700 or something. That's massive. That's huge. That's like way above. That's super GM level, right?
Sure. So that means that in like every large open tournament, assuming that it's like all mixed, you're never going to see women in what, like the top 4 or top 8.
You'll never see women in the top. It depends on what like skill level we're talking about within chess. We don't want to like pair up like the like super GMs, right? With like the IMs or whatever, right? We're not doing that. Generally, the people will compete within like their own skill ranking. I think chess is actually a great example of what I'm proposing.
The highest ranked women's chess player is ranked 93 in the world, and women's elo is a bit inflated because of like the tournaments they play in. Is that true, or
is the I don't know if they're 93 specifically. Is it Judith Polgar or something, or is it somebody else?
I don't know the names. I don't follow professional chess that much.
Okay. Yeah. So the
so
point
you think so? Broadly speaking, you think that
still think this? Well, really quick. Hold on, just a second. Just a second. I think when we take a look at like even if we take a look at chess specifically, right? I don't know enough about esports to comment there, but in chess specifically, we could take a look at the highest rated women, and they do get attention. They do get like they do get sponsorships. And biological advantages that you might say men have, even though I agree it's possible they exist, I don't think they're significant enough to warrant something like women's FIDE master existing, right? Where we give women this like lower ranking, where we pretend it's the same as the higher ranking, and everyone sort of acknowledges that it's worse, right?
I don't think anybody pretends
pretends
that it's the same, but
well, the naming is kind of the same. So women's FIDE master versus FIDE master, women's IM versus IM, right? It's
Sure,
like the
but it's
women version of the normal
right?
rank. Yeah, but isn't it kind of? Don't you think it's like? Do you think it really helps women socially to have the like a shitty version of the title called like the women's version?
More than never getting to hold any title ever, yeah.
Well, but plenty of women hold non-women's titles, right? There are women who are grandmasters, but not women's grandmasters. There are women who are like super GMs, even that's not a title, right? But there are women who are like very, very high ranking in chess. And
Yeah,
I don't think it's like I don't think you don't have any title at all because you don't have a women's title.
First of all, so we're arguing about chess, which is probably going to have one of the least gaps ever because it's one of the least physically demanding things. And even in chess, you're talking about like 1 or 2 exceptions, and there are no women super GMs or whatever. You're literally talking about
there are none.
1 or 2 exceptions. There are 0 women super GMs. There are like
1 or 2
sub 20 super GMs, is what people are saying.
Okay, 0 is very different than sub 20. Super GMs are already a very small group, right? They're like what?
No,
like,
people are saying, hold on. People are saying there are sub 20 super GMs, and none of them are women currently. The highest rated woman is 2650. Super GMs are 2700 plus.
Highest rated woman ever. The highest rated woman ever was, I know Judith Polgar was at least 2735, right?
Maybe at one point in time. I'm talking about currently.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, super GMs are like the chatter said, I'm guessing less than 20 people. So obviously there's going to be like a very, very small amount of super GMs. I don't think there's there's like a small amount of like women in total in chess. The fact that like there's a small amount means like these extremely extremely exceptional cases are very unlikely to be this very small group, right?
Yeah. Backing up to like the broader point, right? So even in chess, where there's like very little like physically demanding thing, where we still see a pretty big chasm in skill from the highest level man versus the highest level woman. And you're saying that if we eliminate it could be physiological reasons, it could be social reasons. I don't know why. I'm not ready to break down the functions of the brain that explicitly determine why.
What is your? I'm not gonna hold you to it as an absolute statement. Is you just have like a wild guess or something, just so we can like at least do intuition pumps or something to talk about the conversation we're having.
My guess is that physiologically, men and women are probably wired a bit differently to be better at certain things. And then because of a small difference, socially, we probably drive this difference to much greater like heights.
Okay. So you think there's like a very large amount of like social pressure that causes these small differences to be much larger. I think these small differences, I'm sure they exist one way or the other, right? Like in one direction or the other direction. I'm just not sure which that direction is. It seems like women have higher IQs on average, for example. So it seems like social pressures would be like the primary driving factor for why we've seen underrepresentation of women. I don't think the social pressures are solved by having things like, for example, like women's FIDE master. I think it harms them and pressures them out of the sport. I don't think it helps them into it.
So why would every single woman athlete disagree with you? Have you ever talked to a woman athlete before that agrees that they should eliminate all women's athletic events?
Do we have polling data that shows that the average woman athlete doesn't want trans women in sports? Would you say
I'm just talking about eliminating. You're trying to say like, oh, it's definitely harmful. It's bad for them. Why do so many women compete? Why don't they just go compete with men then if they think that all these things are so bad?
Well, it seems like they're okay with competing with trans women in their sports, right? It seems like the female athletes don't have like a tremendous issue with that. There are some that do, right? But it's different. I thought earlier you were using them interchangeably.
No, this is a different question. You're talking about right now, we can get to the trans woman question, but right now it sounds like you're talking about the idea that these women's only things are harmful to women. If that's the case,
in some cases they're definitely harmful to women, and in some cases I think the harm is lessened. I think in the case of chess, it's just easily the case. It's harmful to women, right? So
where are all of these women speaking out against these things? Like,
I don't think it's really relevant. This is just kind of it's almost like a really like baseline logical fallacy.
As a man, that they're okay. All right, maybe okay. So moving on, I guess to the trans women, cis women thing. So it sounds like you might believe that trans women have some kind of physiological advantage from their prior being a cis male before transitioning or whatever. Or I don't know if you're cis male, but yeah. So even if that is the case, though, you're still okay with them competing against cis women. Why?
I think they're small enough in number that they're never going to like really push out women from the sport. I think obviously if it was every trans woman was competing in sports, that very small number of like, I think it's like they're 0.3% of the population would be enough. But I think that in the same way that we still let people who are like people who have used steroids in the past, they're allowed to compete once they're off steroids for a while. I think it's fair. Those people have a much larger advantage from those steroids than trans women do from their testosterone.
Wait, what is the
Yeah,
first of all, that's not true. But also, what is the penalty?
Sorry, wait,
if you get caught using performance enhancing drugs, how long are you banned for? From
I wouldn't know, but I know it's not going to be like it's not going to be that period of like this incredibly long, like you're never able to compete line.
I feel like it would be. I might be wrong. I feel like if you got caught in college sports using performance enhancing drugs, you'd be able to compete again before you graduate.
I know there are like UFC competitors who have been caught using performance enhancing drugs and are able to like be let back in, right? Like John Jones, right?
In professional sports, maybe, sure.
Mistaken?
But like in college, people are saying it's 2 to 4 years in college. So, okay. But I mean, like,
so it's only 2 to 4
if you're
years
going to
in
have
college?
a discussion of like, do you think if you're allowed to use performance enhancing drugs, like, should you be allowed to, or should you ever be allowed to compete again? Like, I don't know if I'd necessarily be opposed to a lifetime ban.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I don't know. It depends on the drug, I guess. It depends on how long you're using it for, but.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's 2 years doesn't seem like a very doesn't seem like a very long time. And if we're letting them back into the sports, I don't think it's unfair to say that like it would be fine to let trans women into the sports after like 2 years of HRT at like sub female testosterone levels.
Well, first of all, the testosterone levels aren't sub female; they're still like 4 to 5 times higher. But secondly, if we can show like studies and all the research seems to be pointing towards this, that trans women still inherit a lot of advantages from being male before transitioning. I don't know if like just being off for a few years is like evens the playing field there.
You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like the studies I thought were like pretty inconclusive, and there were ones that like went one way or the other. And I think you've even said that on stream that you think they're like a lot on both sides of the issue, and it's like really hard to make a conclusion based on those.
No, I don't know when you heard me say this on stream, but what I said was that a long time ago, my position was a lot more ambiguous on this because it seemed like the studies went both ways. But in the past few years, I think that the overwhelming amount of research is pointing towards a pretty clear direction. That now we have longitudinal studies that are showing that even after 3 years, trans women still have a pretty significant advantage from being able to train in a male body for a long time. So even 3
what do you
years
think
post-transition.
3 years while having trained in a male body the entire time.
No. 3 years while being on HRT, they still have
after having trained in a male body for a long time. You said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody's like at like a college level, this wouldn't be an advantage. They'd have like, I guess they'd have like a male body as a child or whatever, but they're not really getting like the actual normal male body, right? So the advantage there would be less significant, correct?
Depends on when they transition, but otherwise, no, it wouldn't be.
Yeah. Before college, it would be correct. So depending on when they transition,
high school sports are really important. What do you mean?
Oh, I completely agree that high school sports are important. That just doesn't really address my question, which is like they're not competing with like an adult man's body, right?
Yeah. If you're starting to go through puberty as a male at like 12 or 13, yeah, you're getting
not really an adult man
of,
at 13 or 15.
I'm pretty sure your testosterone as a male peaks at it's like 18 to 21.
Yeah, but the advantages you get from that testosterone don't.
Absolutely. If you compare a 13-year-old weightlifter that's a male to a 13-year-old weightlifter that's female, he's going to be like literally 3 times the weight. Like
no. This is irrelevant. You're comparing males to females. We're comparing like young men to old men, right? We're comparing young men to older men. So this is like you went over and like compared a completely different category.
Okay, I must be misunderstanding. If you're transitioning at age like 19 or 20, you've had a decent amount of time like training in a male body. Like in your pretty formative, like important formative athletic years, from like 12 to 16,
I wouldn't disagree that I wouldn't disagree that they have like no advantage. I just don't think it's significant enough to keep them out of women's sports. Okay,
like I don't like this argument because it makes it sound misogynistic, but like high school boys will beat like women's NBA players. I feel like a lot of this conversation is driven by the fact that people don't realize how huge the difference is between female and male athletes. I think that you guys think that it's
high school
a little bit like I think senior high school
like
basketball,
a real case of that or something.
I don't know if somebody's a link for it, but the men's under 15 team beat the women's national team for soccer. I think there are games.
But using women's NBAs, that seems like a very different claim.
I thought
soccer is like
I thought that for like the WNBA games. It might have been soccer, not NBA.
Okay.
But like, yeah, there's like hugely the WNBA one was not real, the soccer one was real. Okay, there's like pretty big like developmental advantages that you get as a boy, like as early as like probably like 11 or 12.
I'm sure I agree that there are advantages. I haven't disagreed there are advantages. I just don't think they're significant enough to keep trans women out because obviously I agree that there's like the man-woman distinction would be really, really big, right? But
Well,
trans women are not going to have that much of a significant difference.
Okay,
here.
yeah, we're kind of sneaking it. We're begging the question. What do you mean, like they're not big enough to keep trans women out? If they exist and they're measurable and statistically significant, like
yeah,
why would that not be enough?
so
to
if they
keep them
exist,
out?
well, you wouldn't want to keep like I don't know, like Croatian people out of like Serbian sports or something, right? Like you wouldn't.
Wait, we don't divide sports by nationality like that.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we definitely do. We have like national teams. I don't know why you said that.
Inside of a nation, we don't divide sports based on like your nationality or ethnicity. What do you mean?
I didn't say ethnicity, right? But if we're talking about like nationality in particular, I think it is the case. There are probably some nations that are going to want to do that. And they might justify it in this like this the same way you're justifying keeping trans women out of women's sports. And I think that they'd be incorrect in doing that. And the same arguments you'd make towards those groups, I think, could also be made towards like people like you who want to keep trans women out of women's sports entirely.
Wait, there are nations that would ban certain like nationalities or ethnic groups from
pretty racist nations out there. Yeah, not here in the West, right? But there are some pretty racist nations, I think.
Okay, but now you're talking about people just functioning out of bigotry because they're racist. But I'm talking about like if we have a category for like cis women's sports and somebody's able to inherit like biologically male advantages, I don't think that's like a bigotry driven decision, like it just being a racist nation.
Okay, so I think bigotry is definitely a part of the decision here. It might not be part of why you make the decision, but it's part of why like the TERFs do, right?
Hold on, wait. I super don't care. That's not what our conversation right now. Isn't what's driving.
You just mentioned it, right? You mentioned what drives other people.
No. You were telling me that some people might ban certain nationalities, and then you're saying, well, there's some pretty
because they're taller on average or something, right? Like they could like point to the fact that like there's like a larger gap between like the tallest nation and the shortest nation there is between like the heights of men and women, right? So I think there are people who justify this.
I don't know anybody who does this.
Who bans people based on nationality in their sports?
Yeah, in like your country.
In my country, not in my country,
no,
right?
Country.
We used to in our country.
Like Olympic. What do you mean?
We used to in our country based like on things like ethnicity and race, but like ban people from sports, right? We had like the I don't want to say that you didn't name it on Twitch because it's like
physiological competitive advantages or whatever. That was because we were a racist country. That was a decision informed by bigotry.
But I agree. In the case of the ways they justified it, right? It was the idea that like they thought black people on average were barbaric and like they were gonna play the sport in a barbaric way, right? So this is like I agree it's based on bigotry,
I think it's because we were racist and our whole society
well.
was segregated. I don't think it was necessarily because of like competitive advantage stuff. I think we were just really racist. No. All of society was segregated.
They absolutely did think that like black people had like a racial differences that made them like it made it like unreasonable to put them into white people's sports. They thought these were biological racial differences.
Okay. Maybe some people did.
All right.
I still don't know how any of this ties back to how we should like eliminate women's categories.
So I think the long-term goal of like maybe like moving it to a skill-based category, I don't think it's going to push women out so to such an extent that they would have like no women ever getting sponsorships. I think if we see women getting sponsorships in chess, I think we'd see the same thing in like any other field. I think the chess analogy is pretty apt here. I think that like the reason we have women's sports is because of the fact there's a social pressure against them competing. I think if we grant this, this is the reason we want them in there. Then I think it's really, really reasonable to also grant that we'd want other people who have that pressure against them to be able to compete as well. And the only way we're going to do that reasonably is going to be like by letting trans women compete with the cis women.
Okay, I just not only do I wholesale reject this argument, I think it's ridiculous that we would even dream of eliminating the category of women's sports on the hope that in the future maybe it inspires more women because now they can be ranked 600 in open divisions. I think that's ridiculous.
It's just like a straw man. I don't know why you're not engaging with the argument.
Just said. Hold on. Whoa. Hold on. I'll restate everything you said and tell me when I mess up.
Sure. Yeah.
You're saying that if we get rid of female divisions and we have open competitions, that women that are way down in the ranks, just because they're women, will still be getting sponsorships because they'll be the highest women ranked in those sports. And that in our transition towards a more kind of like genderless idea of sports, we will still have women competing even more now because they're not being shackled by the silliness of all women's divisions, and they'll still have all the same representation.
Yeah, I'll correct you. You're wrong. I I don't think I ever said that women could be competing more. I think I almost said the inverse several times. That like I think it's understandable that some women won't be playing the sports.
Okay, you're dead wrong. So maybe you've misspoken multiple times, but what you've told me multiple times is that there might be a lot of social factors keeping women from competing, and you've alluded to the idea that women don't care about all women's titles, and that's why you've said that like if we get rid of
I haven't alluded to that idea. I think there are women who do. You point out the athletes who do. I just don't think this is enough to warrant the existence of these titles, because I think it provides more social harms across the entirety of society. Okay,
so then I'll give you a chance to clarify then. So then do you think it's possible that by doing what you're suggesting, we have less women competing in sports?
I think it's absolutely absolutely a possibility that less women might compete in sports. I just don't think it's enough to justify keeping trans women out.
What does that mean enough? Like, let's say like 20% less women compete in sports now. Is that a worthy trade-off for you?
I think that 20% less women is like a very, very arbitrary number. I'm not sure where you've thrown it here, but like I don't think it'd be like I don't imagine that the social benefits would be outweighing it at 20%. So I don't know where the number actually lies, but I know it's not where it is currently,
women
right?
Stop, then you don't think that's worth it then at that point, or?
Well, I think when 20% of women who currently are in sports, we're talking, right? Stopping.
Or just the number of like women that would sign up for sports, if it decreases by 20%.
I think decreasing by 20, okay, the women who sign up. I think it's not likely to be the case that 20% get pushed out by the small group of like 0.3% of the population going into sports. I don't think it's likely, right? Like you're saying we need this separate category for trans women. I don't think it's reasonable.
Wait, hold on. You totally shifted the goalpost there. We're not talking about them being pushed out because of trans people in the sports. We're talking about them being pushed out because you eliminated women's sports. Because that's just
you are talking about them being pushed out because of trans people in the sports. You said that trans women being in the sports would push out cis women. Yes, you did. Yeah, you did.
I'm working in I'm working in your hypothetical. You told me that your goal was to eliminate these women's sports and have everybody competing in the same category.
Long term, I think it'd be good to do, but right now, I think the categories allowing trans women in them is fine. And I think that you seem to not think the categories as they exist now is fine. You want trans women out of sports entirely, and you said like in their own league, or if that's not mathematically possible, just not competing at all. Like,
we're moving away from your whatever thing you gave earlier then about having open divisions. Can we both agree with that? Because that's what I was talking about. So we're not going to talk now about having everybody competing in the same division. Now we're going to talk about women's sports. Is that
we can so as it exists currently, women's sports would exist, and I think a long-term future goal is reasonable to have like open divisions, right?
Okay,
I think
so we'll just deal with what's now.
Claims, right?
I do agree, but I was talking about the other, but now you don't agree. Okay, so then let's go back
I think both relate to each other because of the fact that like you're bringing up one proposal, I'm bringing up another one, right?
Okay, but I asked you in your proposal if it was possible that like less women would be competing overall, and you said, yeah, that's possible. And I was like, okay, well, how many less would make it like worth the trade-off of having no women's sports? Let's say 20% less women are doing athletics then. Is that an okay trade-off? Is that acceptable for you? And then you switched it to, you're saying that you're saying that 0.03% of trans women are going to push out all women from sports. No, that's not what I was talking about. I was working within your paradigm of having like divisionless sports. That's what I was talking about.
Okay, so I understand your argument now.
Yeah, so I think we can move off of like the and just talk about today.
I'm okay with addressing now that I understand the argument you're making. So if we're talking about like the long distance, women will be pushed out of sports. Yeah, I think totally within like I don't know, like 80 years down the line or whatever. If women aren't playing, if women are playing sports 20% less, I think the social benefits of not having those categories would easily outweigh that. Yeah, I think currently as it exists, what we have to do is Jesus. I mean, why is that wrong?
I'm going to do a little bit of id-pol optics here, but like you as a cis man is saying that women's sports are harmful.
No, you're mistaken. Well, firstly, you're mistaken.
I know I am. I'm doing an id-pol argument. I don't care if you're not. Are you? Am I missing an identity? Yeah, go.
You are, but the id-pol argument's kind of
you got to give him a check, and he has to be able to finish his sentences. So, Destiny.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Are you a trans woman or something? Did I miss?
Yeah, you just missed an identity or whatever there. I'm like, I am non-binary, but it's kind of irrelevant.
Cis presenting, I think, as our fellow id-pollers would say, man is basically saying like we're going to eliminate all of women's sports.
I think the id-pol argument's not really. Really relevant.
We'll
right?
ditch the id-pol.
You can adjust my point, not personal attacks.
The idea of eliminating it's a little bit. It's personal to a certain group of people, right? Like this would be like the equivalent of me like telling.
Yeah, but doesn't justify a personal attack in lieu of a counter argument, does it?
I'm not doing a personal attack. I'm saying that the optics of this is like can be largely driven by like men.
You were doing a personal attack. You don't have to lie about it.
Okay.
That's fine. I'll just ignore it.
It's not a personal attack. I understand you don't care about any of the identities at stake because you're not threatened. But that's fine. I understand. Listen, I'm a white guy. I feel similarly to that in a lot of other cases. Okay. I think that the idea of eliminating women's sports because it supposedly has some positive blowback in the rest of society is insane. That I couldn't imagine making that argument public. Like that just seems crazy to me.
Sure, but why is it wrong?
Because one, it's a baseless claim. You have absolutely no evidence or can't point to anything that eliminating these women categories is somehow beneficial. This is going to be 100% philosophical.
Oh, I can. Yeah, if you just ask for the evidence, so we could talk about like the ways we could abduct, right, or the ways we can induct from the other examples we have of like removing the segregations within a sport and seeing social benefits because of that. So if we see like we allow trans women into sports and broadly, I think these social benefits could be things like I'm sorry, what's the face you're making? You're doing demon mama face.
Yeah, eliminating segregation in sports based on race was not there for the same reason segregation exists based on sex, right?
What do you think the reason we had segregation based on race was?
Because we had a racist society that saw like black people or non-white people and white people as fundamentally different, and that non-white people shouldn't be able to participate in a lot of the parts of society that white people participate in.
Why do you think we have women's sports?
Because we want to have a protected area for women to be able to compete in and feel like they can win in certain divisions without being dominated by cis men.
Okay. So
segregated spaces were made to
they were
hurt
made because they thought
POC.
black people were they were made because they thought the POC. Oh my god. They were made because they thought that black people are biologically inferior.
No.
I don't understand.
But not
yeah.
hold on. Segregated spaces.
They thought they were barbaric.
Segregated spaces were made to hurt persons of color. They were made to help cis women. Do you understand the difference between the driving factor behind making these spaces? Or do you not acknowledge what I'm saying as being true?
Sure, I understand the argument you're making. One, you say things helps the minority group. One, you think harms the minority group. I think affirmative action in the case of sports isn't going to benefit this minority group in the way that you're like trying to present it as though it does.
Okay, so I'm just asking you to acknowledge that like you can't compare racial segregation in sports to.
There are ways that we can. There are ways that we can, and I agree there are ways that we can't, right? There are differences between the two. One is about sex, one's about race, for example. But there are ways in which they are similar, right?
I don't agree, but okay, go ahead.
They segregate people into groups based on perceived athletic performance.
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think that the driving difference in athletic performance was why persons of color were excluded from American athletic performance.
You don't think there's a justification that a lot of people gave when they were talking about like why they want to keep black people out of like the white leagues?
No, I think it was racism. There might have been on the surface some bullshit argument.
Absolutely. Okay.
It's not comparable to why
I understand your position now. Now you're
it.
saying it's a bullshit argument, right? So the answer would be yes then. People did give that argument. You just don't think it's valid. You don't think it's like a legitimate argument.
It's not even a real argument that was being put forth. Like they might say it, but like, do you think that argument is comparable to arguing for a protected women's space in sports?
I think I don't think it's the exact same argument, but I think there are ways in which they overlap. One is like they're both based on based on perceived biological advantages.
Why do you keep saying perceived biological advantages? Do you think that there are only perceived biological advantages between men and women and not real biological advantages between men and women?
I agree. No, I've told you several times I agree there are. I don't know why you keep strawmanning me on this.
Hold on, I'm not strawmanning because you keep saying that like they're both based on perceived biological advantages. The difference between black people and white people in sports is not the same as the difference between men and women in sports.
I agree. I mean, if you want to talk about like black people being taller on average or something, then we could point at that as like a real biological advantage, but I don't think the advantage is there justify keeping them out.
Black people are taller on average than white people?
They might be taller or short. I have no idea. I know that there are going to be like some differences, right?
They're not. Okay, but sure.
You don't think there are any? You think there are no differences whatsoever?
I'm not saying there are no differences whatsoever, but I don't think in general black people are taller than white people. I'm pretty sure the tallest people in the world are white, right? Like people from the fucking Netherlands and shit that go like on average like 6'4" or something stupid.
No, I agree that they're like the tallest people in the world. Yeah, I'm sure that the Netherlands is up there. I think it might be number one. But the issue here is like there are going to be certain things that are like you can point to as real biological advantages. We just never accept those are significant enough to keep people into separate leagues. I think in the case of
because
trans
we don't separate leagues based on like every other thing. We do separate them based on sex. Because we haven't decided in life that like it's important that short men be able to play basketball, but we have decided in life that it's important for women to be able to play sports.
Why isn't it important that short men be able to play basketball?
Because I don't think that it's possible to carve out a space in society where every single person can have representation in every single area. So broadly speaking, I don't know if short men need to have representation across every single sport, but broadly speaking, women should probably have a place where they can be competitive in sports.
So why do women need that? Why do you think women need that place where they can be competitive with other women in sports? What do you think the purpose of that is?
Because people enjoy playing sports and people like to be competitive and people like to have people that they can look up to that are competitive.
Well, what's the difference between what women enjoy sports but short men don't is not the argument you're going with here. I want to know what's the symmetry breaker between like short men and women. What is it that makes women need a place in sports but short men not?
First of all, there are some sports probably that short men can play, but secondly, because I guess we can call it arbitrary. We haven't decided. We don't push short men out of sports. Is your argument? We don't have every single height and every single weight represented across all sports, but broadly speaking, we probably want like men represented in sports, and broadly speaking, we probably want women represented in sports.
Broadly speaking, I think we also want trans women represented in sports, don't we?
I don't know. And what sport? That's the kind of if we had enough trans people to play their own league, yeah, sure. But I don't think we want trans women represented in sports at the expense of the competitive integrity of women's leagues. It's kind of
I don't think it harms the competitive integrity of women's leagues to let trans women in there. I think it's just the case that we'll have like a group of people who are disproportionately going to be like probably above average at the sport, right? But I don't think it's enough to push women out entirely. I don't think it's enough to justify not letting trans women into sports.
If we let trans women into cis women's sports, why not let weak men into women's sports?
I think the reason that somebody who wants to keep these categories would like give as like a permanent reason would be that in the case of like women, right, they are pushed out of sports culturally, and so it's good to keep these categories in there because of the fact that there's a social pressure against women competing, right? So making sure that women, people who are disproportionately not allowed to compete as much, are able to go in and compete, I think is a fine reason. I just don't think that like long term this makes sense. I'm not really sure what you just said. I could clarify maybe. The question you asked, right, was why is it the case that or why would we even keep the categories at all, right? Why is it the case that we'd have like the men and women's leagues at all? Why not let men who are just like weak men compete in women's sports? I'm saying the reason is because those weak men might not be pushed against sports, but might be pushed in favor of them, is the argument somebody might give, right? Somebody who supports the permanent keeping of these leagues.
I don't understand. The weak men might be pushed in favor of the sports. Then
Sorry. Now that I understand the part where we're having trouble, I think weak men will still be told like, "Hey, you're a man, go play sports," right? Whereas like trans women won't, right? Weak men will be told, "You're a man, go play sports, go to the sports with other men." A trans woman, obviously, there's some cases where they are going to be told that they're a man and they need to go play sports, but I think a lot of them are pushed away from sports, whereas like weak men are still pushed towards sports. I think that's a reasonable like symmetry breaker here, right?
I just disagree. I don't know. Maybe we had different experiences. I don't understand. Like the weak men are pushed towards sports. It sounds like you have like this. Yeah. You think that there's like this hyper tradcon view of society where like men are pushed to be like warrior sports people and women are pushed. I don't think it's that unreasonable to say like men are pushed towards competing in certain fields and like women are pushed against it, right? You had granted the idea that like there are ways that like the social differences like push and pull these people apart. I think it's like I don't know. It just seems inconsistent. You're both saying that and like not willing to grant it when maybe our lived experiences are like super different, but like
lived experiences, please don't like stop with the id bullshit. Lived experience. Hold
on. I'm trying really hard not to call you a retard, okay? Because everything you're saying is like flies in the face of everything that I grew up experiencing. Sure. Okay. And all the private girls' schools that were near me, like you had to take a sport in your first 2 years. It wasn't like even an option. Like you were forced into sports when you were a woman. And across all the schooling that I did, women were heavily pushed. Now, usually it was like things like soccer, but every woman that I knew in my grade school classes, and then every woman in the all girls high schools were always like hardcore pushed to doing sports all the time. It's really important. Extracurricular sports. This idea that you're talking, and this isn't Catholic schools. So this idea that you're talking about, we're like, oh, women are pushed against schools. It sounds like this, it sounds like this fantasy version of like Alabama, where like women are told like, oh no, like go do home ec, don't do. I don't think it's
fantasy. I think that it's really weirdly inconsistent.
I'm trying to engage with you as hard. I'm trying to engage you as well as I can. I'm trying to engage you as well as I can, but like you're giving me this world that I never saw growing up ever. And I lived in Nebraska and I went to Catholic school. So I feel like if it did exist, I would have seen it there. Now maybe there are places in like Louisiana or Alabama where this is like way more hardcore, but I don't like it. Like if we were to look up the numbers, if you want to Google it right now, of like women that play high school sports and men that play high school sports, like do you think that these numbers are like dramatically off from one another, that women just like never compete in sports or participate in sports? Or it sounds like you're talking about a world in like the 40s or 50s or something, or not even, maybe like the 10s or 20s.
I mean, you earlier even said yourself that you're kind of just strawmanning my argument, like trying to blow it up to like an exaggerated version instead of like attacking the one that I made. You even said earlier yourself that you think it's the case that there are social pressures that push women into being like less represented in sports, and it's not just like biology there. I think if it's I think it's pretty reasonable to say like women sign up for sports less. I don't think this is like a hard thing to argue here. I don't think it's
Okay,
like
so just
like
as
a
a quick
weird
thing, so 52%
Alabama view of the
of
world.
boys, 52% of boys participated in high school sports, and 44% of girls did. So I think the numbers are getting to parity. I don't think it's as dramatic as you're saying it is.
What are the sports that they're playing in? It's like high school girls are not going to be the same sports that we're talking about here, right? They're going to be things like cheerleading.
It's not. It's going to
right?
be things like cheerleading and volleyball, probably more than like football or basketball. And then
I
things
agree.
like
They're
soccer
pushed.
and those.
Yeah, I don't think we're worried about like what like men competing in volleyball pushing out the women competitors, or men competing in cheerleading pushing out the women competitors. Do we?
Trans women might push out cis women in volleyball, maybe. If that's the argument we're talking about, which is what we were talking about, was trans.
I don't think. Are we really worried about trans women like pushing out like the female cheerleaders?
Cheerleaders probably not, but in things like volleyball.
Okay,
or soccer,
so the 44% we're talking about is largely going to be things like for example cheerleading, right? So it's not the argument doesn't really work for your argument, does it?
I don't know if that's true. Do you think that most girls that do sports are just all doing cheerleading? Wait, can you repeat that for me? That was very funny.
Why? What is the? Okay, the argument you're making is just a wild straw man. I'm not saying that all. I don't. Whoa, can you stop with it? Stop with the smug thing. I'm trying to answer you. Okay. We don't have to do that.
Understand.
I'm just trying to engage you. Okay. Please hold on. Whoa. Just a second.
Okay, both of you, take it easy.
Okay, my bad.
Synth, you go, and then Destiny, you go. Okay, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm not saying that like every single person or every single woman who's competing in sports is doing it in cheerleading. I think that it's completely reasonable to say that there are some are going to be competing in volleyball. I just think that when we talk about that 44% number, a large group of that, at least I would assume, is going to be like a large group of that is going to be sports that like men just don't compete in as much. They're going to be ones that we wouldn't say that like women are pushed away from.
So
they're going to be things like, for example, like cheerleading and volleyball.
So here's the top ones.
It's sure.
Track and field, volleyball, basketball, soccer, then softball.
Okay, things like track and field, I don't think women are being pushed too far out of in the same way that they would be in like the average sport like football or something.
Yeah, the women probably aren't going to be playing football as much. I agree with you there. Okay.
Sure. So we can agree they're pushed out of some sports, right?
They probably also just don't want to play.
I just want to be able to know that we're on the same page.
I don't know how much is social.
I'm sure. Why do you think they don't want to play those sports as much?
Synth. You have to give him a chance to complete his sentence now. Okay.
No, I finished. He's fine.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize you were talking.
I'll start screaming.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Like, I mean, like, do you think that men are pushing?
Why do you think the women that? Go ahead. I didn't want to.
Oh shit! Wait, hold on. I think it's lagging. I think that's why it sounds like we're interrupting each other a lot right now.
I think so. Synth, is there like an echo coming from your side?
No, I don't think it's not an echo. I think I think the call is lagging right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there might be a lag here. I don't hear an echo on my side though.
I don't hear any echo right now.
Okay. Well, if you guys are more polite to one another and give that time for that silence, then maybe you guys can have that back and forth more productively. Go for it.
Wow.
Try.
Okay, go for it, Synth.
All right. Sure. Yeah. It seems like when it comes to like the women's sports we're talking about here, that we're scared of like trans women pushing them out of. I think it's like. I don't think it's the case that we can say that like women are just not at all pushed away from sports. I think there has to be some kind of social factor there. If you're saying women don't want to compete in those as much, I think the reason they don't want to compete in those as much might like a lot of that might have to do with those social factors that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, maybe, but we're not talking about the argument is never about trans women pushing cis women out of sports. It's about trans women having a competitive advantage that's supposed to be eliminated by protecting women's sports for cis women. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I feel like I don't see how this relates to the earlier argument. If we're agreeing, right, that there is a social pressure, then I don't think it's reasonable to say there's not a social pressure when the context.
I don't know what social pressure
argument
has to do with any of this conversation at all.
It had a lot to do with it. You kept saying that it didn't exist, right? That there was no social pressure. That you don't think the reason there's any kind of like disparity is because of social pressure.
I don't know what that has to do about talking about the competitive advantage that a trans woman would have over a cis woman in an athletic event. I don't know how that relates.
Because if your argument is that there's like no if the reason we have these sports has nothing to do with these social pressures, right? If that's not the reason we have these sports because the social pressures don't exist, then I think it's an unreasonable argument to make that. It's unreasonable to make that argument if we know the social pressures do in fact exist. You were making the argument earlier. It couldn't be the case that these were the reason we had these were because of the social pressures, because in fact, women are socially pressured into sports, not pressured out of them, right? So this argument no longer applies because we both agree now that there are social pressures in sports. There are social pressures for women to not compete in sports, and for men to compete in sports. So your earlier argument no longer applies, right?
I'm a baby brain. It's my low IQ. I don't know how this social pressure thing has anything to do with what we're talking about. So
okay,
so I guess
I can write it out for you if you want.
It seems like if trans women have a competitive edge over cis women in sports, regardless of any social pressure, and if we have created cis women sports as a way to protect women to be able to compete in sports, it seems weird that we would have trans women in that are getting an edge on cis women due to the same barriers that we've made to keep like men from competing with women.
If the point of women's sports is for this one goal, this one purpose of making sure that people who are pushed out of competing are able to compete, then I think that allowing women, like trans women, into the sports, not just cis women, could have a similar advantage and apply to those trans women as well. That's why I brought that up. So that was the reason I brought that up.
The goal of cis women's sports isn't to help people that are pushed out. They're not.
The argument you gave for this was that they aren't being pushed out at all, right? Now that that argument doesn't apply, that's why I was addressing the argument of the social pressures.
It wouldn't be social pressures pushing women out of competing in open divisions. It would be biological factors that would never be overcome, that would always keep women from competing. That would be the issue.
Okay, I don't think it would. I don't think it would prevent women from ever competing, right? To have trans women in these sports, because we have trans women in these sports and they still compete out there.
No, you were talking about the social pressures for having women's sports.
Yes. No, I was talking about the social pressures that cause women, or I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, I was talking about the social pressures that cause us to need a women's sports, or it caused us to need a women's sports at one point in time, right? I think those social pressures also apply to trans women, and thus would be reasonable to allow them into the sports, because the point of those sports is obviously to, it's to decrease those social pressures where we view women as like a group of people.
Wait, no. The point of sports is not some grand social experiment to be progressive on. Yeah, I don't know where this is coming from. That like the purpose of women's sports is to decrease. The purpose of women's sports is to give women a place to compete, to be competitive. And
yes, what's the point of? Yeah, there's a point for that, right? There's a reason we want women to be able to compete and be competitive, right?
Because we want women to be able to compete and be competitive in sports. That is the point.
Yeah, but there's a reason why we want them to be able to compete and be competitive. We don't just like feel that way arbitrarily. We have a reason for that, right?
What is the reason?
Because it provides certain social benefits, right?
That's a really weird way of looking at it, I think. But I guess sure. Like if the provide some social benefit is that it makes women feel more included in society, then sure.
It makes women feel more included in society is the reason you're giving, right?
Yeah, because they have the ability to participate in sports like men do. Yeah.
Exactly. This would apply to trans women too, then, right?
But you can't elevate trans women at the expense of cis women. Okay.
Do you think currently that women are feeling less included in society to such a degree that the ways that the incredible amount of like anti-trans bigotry that we have isn't going to outweigh that? Right? If we could solve one problem or like ignore the other, which one do you think of these as like you don't think that's more important?
I don't think that the only way to solve anti-trans bigotry is by threatening women's sports.
Okay, how do you think that we can have trans women in sports outside of the proposal that you agree wouldn't work, right?
I think that trans women in sports are not related to trans bigotry in the United States. This is an incredibly divisive wedge issue that affects a very, very small percentage of trans people.
So why do you think that it applies to why do you think it applies to women then if it doesn't apply to trans women?
I'm saying that overall, the overall trans issues that exist in the United States, I don't think that trans sports is like the most important or even up in the top like 5 or 10 things.
I agree. It's not the most. I don't think it's the most important, but I think we have to understand that there's diminishing returns to the different things we prioritize, and I think it's reasonable for these like lower priority issues like trans sports to still get some attention and still get some push. I think that making the argument against it isn't. I don't think making the argument against trans sports is something that's going to help trans people overall.
I think that if you are talking about threatening all of women's sports for something that won't even really make that big of a budge in all the trans folk in the United States, and might actually drive a lot more of it. I don't view that as being like, we need to integrate trans women into cis women's sports because it'll help maybe trans people at the expense of the competitive integrity of women's sports. The
same ways that you talked about it helping women, right? Should also apply to trans women. It should apply to like the idea of like women have more representation, right? And those trans women would also have more representation. People would have like trans women celebrities. I think this would be beneficial.
Yeah, to those groups of people. But at the end of the day, too, you can't take a space that was made for like 50% of society and then destroy that space to appease like 0.5% of society.
Well, it was made for 50% of society. That 50% of society is women, right?
Yes.
Okay, trans women, we both agree are women, so they should
not
be
in this.
represented
No,
too.
That's what's literally at debate here. No, of course not. Trans women are not cis women, right?
Okay, I'm not saying they're cis women, right? They're part of the overall category of women, right?
Yeah,
there's cis women and trans women in there. They're a subset. I agree. They're a very small number of. They're a very small number of women, but I think it's fair to include them within women's sports.
No, women's sports were not made to include all women. It was made to include cis women.
Okay, so I think if we're talking about what it was made to do, I don't think that's the same thing as saying like what it ought be used to do, right?
No,
if we understand,
that's a whole conversation about what it ought to be.
Yeah, exactly. You're just sort of like, okay, then you're just begging the question then. So you're just saying like, here's what it was made to do, therefore what it ought to do, and we agree that those are different conversations.
No, hold on. We weren't talking about the prescription. Okay. Our whole debate is about the prescription, the ought part. We were talking about the description. What were women's sports made for? Women's sports were made for cis women to compete with one another.
So the reason that women's sports were like specifically made to prioritize cis women is because trans women weren't even like seen as a thing that existed at the time. It's not the reason. This isn't like a reasonable extrapolation of like what our purpose is for why we want women's sports around, right? If we want women's sports around, the reason we want that around is because of the social benefits that gives to women as a whole, not just cis women. So all those reasons you'd give would also apply to trans women, right? So I don't see any issue here with like also letting trans women compete. They haven't stopped the sports from working, right? The sports still still exist.
We're going around in circles. So this is so weird. So you fully concede the idea that trans women do have a biological edge over cis women, but you think that just doesn't matter.
I've said that the whole time. Yeah. I just don't think it's significant enough to push them out.
Because trans women's representation is more important than having like cis women's sports.
I don't think it's the case that like a cis women's sport specifically has much of a point to it. I think women's sports has like a point to it currently. But I think eventually it's understandable that we might want to like wither this away too.
Okay. Well, I'm not in favor of eliminating women's sports, so I don't know. I think we should just open.
Nobody's talking about eliminating. No, nobody's talking about like right now eliminating women's sports, right? We're just talking about
right now, like a weasel. But that's essentially what you're saying. You would eliminate. You'd seek to eliminate. Like ideally, like women's sports would be gone, and women would just be like
in like 80 years. Sure, I don't think that's. Yeah. I don't think that's like a wild claim, right?
I do. I think that if you were to talk to any, if you were to bring on like a woman athlete,
well, let's hold on just a second here. Just whoa, just really quick. Whoa. Okay, sure. So if we're talking about like the specifics of the way that it currently exists, I don't think that like pushing trans women out of these sports entirely is something that there seems to be much of an argument for, given that the advantages that you can point to for like how these sports would have advantages for cis women would also exist for trans women. And I think without some kind of like symmetry breaker, some way to like divide these two, and so that the advantages only exist for one but not the other, I don't think it's reasonable to push trans women out.
Okay, I don't know.
I mean, the sports still exist, right? Like as they exist currently, they have trans women, they still exist.
I'm brain dead. I don't. Whenever you start talking about like the social pull and push, I have no idea what you're talking about. I completely don't follow that part of the conversation.
I'll just clarify, right? So when I say the social benefits, right, I'm talking about things like for example, the facts that like it seems like there's like a social pressure against women being in sports. It seems
that's not true.
You
I never
kind of agree, but kind of don't agree.
No, I never agree with that. You keep saying that over and over again, but I've never agreed with that. So I don't. Like you seem to think,
you don't agree there's any kind of pressure against women in sports.
You seem to think that like sports exist, but women won't play sports unless we make women sports because there's no social push for them to play sports. But that's not true. The idea is we don't need to socially push women to play sports. They want to play sports because a lot of women like playing sports, but they are not competitive against men. So we create.
Will they stop playing? Will they stop playing sports if we didn't have cis women's places?
I think a lot of them would. Almost all of them would. Yes.
Okay, so then
I think you would feel like
it would be the case if we didn't have it would be the case if we didn't have cis women's sports. Do you think they'd be pressured out of it?
Yes.
You do think this?
I think that if we didn't have cis women's sports, most cis women would stop playing sports. Yes.
Okay, so the point of women's sports is to make sure the cis women continue to play sports because otherwise they'd be pressured out of it, right?
They wouldn't be able to compete biologically.
Okay, so you think they wouldn't be able to compete biologically and that would demotivate them from competing in the sport at all, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So pressuring women out of sports is what would happen if we didn't have women's sports, right? We have women's sports to make sure that they aren't pressured out of sports, and thus other people, it would be reasonable to, if it was the case that like the only other alternative was to pressure them out of sports, to allow them to play in women's sports, so long as they don't like completely ruin the utility that the women's sports serves currently as it is, right? So I think it's reasonable to say like we should allow trans women to compete in women's sports because women don't not compete in sports at all as it currently exists, right? And trans women are able to compete in those sports.
We don't know.
So trans women are currently able to compete in those sports. Women still compete in those sports. They might change in the future.
Yes.
We can't know this. This is just like arbitrary speculation.
No, hold on. I can already like say without even getting to the future that you shouldn't have groups of people with unfair biological advantages that come from crossing the divisions in the league they shouldn't be allowed to compete already. I can say that without even going into the future. But theoretically, also, if we do agree that these advantages exist, then theoretically, into the future, we should reasonably expect it to change. That we should start to see more trans women competing against cis women. If the biological advantages are there, we should start to see that change over time.
If we're talking about this group of people, that's like,
hold on, real quick, this is an important part too. If that does change, by the time it changes, it's too late. Women's sports will be gone forever. Because once trans people have been rolled into women's sports, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. It would be the most bigoted thing in the world. You talk about like getting rid of their records, like undoing all the infrastructure for trans women and cis women to compete. It'll never go back. So it's pretty important to analyze this now. And if you're already making the concession that they'll have a biological advantage, I don't know why you wouldn't expect to see more overrepresentation of them at the highest leagues later on in life. Because trans women are such a small group of the population that the extremes that exist within this group wouldn't exist in large enough numbers to even begin to overrepresentation themselves, right? Nothing you said made sense there, right? So they're a small group in society, has nothing to do with overrepresentation. Overrepresentation. I can explain. No, I understand what you mean. I understand what overrepresentation is. The issue is like when we're talking about the specific groups who are extremes, right? For a very, very large group, there's going to be more people who are in that extreme. It'll even like begin to overrepresent themselves, right? No, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Yes?
No, you're wrong. The problem is that the people that tend to be, in this case, you're wrong. If we were having a trans man argument, you might be correct. But the problem is that cis men, tend to inhabit the extremes on both sides more than cis women do. So that's an issue for trans women who already have a biological advantage, will even be more represented because men tend to inhabit the extremes more. The lowest IQ people on the planet tend to be men. The highest IQ people on the planet tend to be men. Like you're saying they have a wider distribution. I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree that there's a wider distribution for men and they exist more in the extremes. But when we talk about trans people, then the group is so incredibly small that they don't have the mathematical numbers to even find a bunch of you don't have like the mathematical chance to even find like 5-7 foot tall trans women or 7 feet tall trans women. That's probably not true. I mean, like
it would be 1 in 3. It would be like one.
We only need like a few hundred people
for the average cis man. So firstly, trans women will have like there's certain ways in which their heights will be decreased on average by things like hormones, right? Very small, like 1 inch decreases. And on top of that, it's like 1 in 3 million. 1 in 3 million cis men are going to be the people who like have the ability to be 7 feet tall. It's very, very, very rare, right? So we have a very, very large number of people who are like cis, right? But a very small number of people who are trans women. The idea of you finding like trans women who both want to compete and say something like women's NBA and who are 7 feet tall, like 7 feet tall is already 1 in 3 million for the group of people who are like a cis men, right? So the idea of you finding those people for this very, very, very small group to compete in women's NBA or something just wouldn't even exist. They would never push women out of sports.
Like you can't. There are mathematicians in my community if you want to argue with how like horribly abusive you're being towards mathematical processes.
Can you just explain why I'm wrong then? Not just like appeal to like the mathematicians in your community, but to tell me why it's wrong.
What you're banking on is the statistical likelihood that the sample size is going to be small enough that you're not going to wind up with people that end up at the extremes of your data set. That's just not true, right? There's like there are I can't formalize it why, but isn't it something like you only need like 12 people in order to like have a 50% chance of like guessing a birthday given 365. Like there's a lot of ways that statistics work out.
Wait, that's completely unrelated. Go ahead.
Retarded shit. Okay. You can't just say that like there's a small number. You can't just say there's a small number of trans people. Therefore, we can count on them never showing up at the extreme statistically. That's not true. You probably only need like a couple thousand trans people to start to see the distribution almost exactly resemble what it would be in society. Okay. It's a huge misnomer. We saw this during the election season where people would say like, you can't poll 1,000 people and know what people think. You've got to poll at least 1 million people. That's not how numbers work. That's not how stats work. That's not how the central fucking limit theorem works. Like you can go and read 1 million math videos or papers about why you only need like a small data set that can be incredibly representative of larger like sets of data. So no, that idea that there aren't enough trans people for it to be an issue, unless you're talking about like literally like 4 trans people, this is ridiculous.
So the issue is it kind of ends up being on some state levels about 4 trans people. The argument you gave earlier about like the birthdays argument, it's like 23 people or something, right? That you take to have like a 50-50 chance of 2 people having the same birthday. Yeah, that's because there's like 365 possible birthdays, and you have a lot of people here. Yeah, I agree 23 people would be enough there. It's completely unrelated to the argument I was making, which is about the fact that the sample size is so incredibly small, you wouldn't have enough people to push people out. You just don't have the numbers to do that.
When I say push people out, I don't mean that the league is 100% trans people. What I mean is you start to create an environment where it becomes impossible for cis women to win. So you might only need 1 or 2 trans swimmers that start breaking some records that are never again broken by cis women. That's what I mean when I say push people out. I don't mean that you have a team of like 10 trans swimmers. I mean that you start to get trans women that start to filter up to holding records in these areas where cis women will never hold them again. So
since we've started to allow like trans women into sports for any like major sports organization, right? Any like very, very large like national one or like international one, do you think any of these have reduced the number of women competing in them or like made it impossible for women to win?
At this point, probably not, since it's all still incredibly new stuff.
Okay. Do you think it's made it less possible for women to win in any kind of way that you can point to statistically?
At this point, probably not, because it's new stuff. But as I said earlier, this is a Pandora's box that once it's opened, you're probably never going back. And if you agree with me on the science of all of this, we should expect to see in the future more trans women dominating these events.
Okay. So I agree with you on, I think the fact that there is an advantage for trans women. I think that the advantage exists. I don't think it's significant enough for it to ever be the case that it pushes them out completely, because we haven't even seen a trend. We haven't even seen a trend in like any notable trend in like overrepresentation in these like large scale international organizations, right? It's still the case that trans women underrepresent themselves in these fields. And I don't know what the reason you have for that, but the only reason I can think of are the ones I've listed earlier. I don't think it's reasonable to assume that suddenly it's going to flip and they're going to start overrepresenting themselves. I don't think there's a trend in that direction.
Do you think there's a trend in like more people getting access to being trans, or more people being able to be socially accepted as trans in society?
There will be more trans people, then, and thus there won't be an overrepresentation. It'll just be
no. That
yeah, you're naming an example of people, but you're naming an example of a case where like more people will be identifying as trans, right?
I'm saying that more people will be identified as trans, but not just identified as trans, like socially accepted as trans. Because right now there are probably a lot of people that are trans that might want to do sports, but they get enough pushback from their family or friends or school that they don't want to do anything publicly trans because they hate their lives being trans because of all the pushback they get in society for, right? Okay, but as people become more accepted, it's more likely that they might feel more comfortable like participating in sports or athletic events.
Okay, so you're saying that there's going to be the case where it's going to become the case where it's they might begin to overrepresent because of the fact that they feel more comfortable with it. I think at that point, then once that happens, I don't think it's like too unreasonable to start talking about it then. Like, okay, trans people are pretty well accepted. They're accepted at about the rates of the general population, or even like a bit below, right? So maybe we could like pull back from the trans sports things and change and adjust the levels so that like the levels closely resemble where the actual representation is in the general population. I think that's fine to do. I don't think it's the case that it'll be like an insanely bigoted action that we'll never be able to do. I think it's reasonable to like change and adjust levels in these sports down the line once there actually is a problem. I don't think it's reasonable to start doing the solutions to a non-existent problem now on the speculation there might be a problem in the future. I think this just harms trans women.
We already have a problem now. You just don't think it's a problem because you want to see.
No, you don't think it is either.
No.
The
problem that exists right now that we agree on.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that trans women do have a biological advantage related to
Don't think
sex.
that's a problem.
Okay, well, everybody that has ever made like divisions of sports based on sex agrees that it's a problem to have people that get advantages because of a different sex.
It's just like a weird argument that you like appeal to these like athletes who aren't here, and like instead of just like giving the reason that you have for these, your reasoning isn't like
it's not appealing to why they're not here. It's just the sports are set up as men and women. That's why the sports are set up. That's what the divisions are called, is male and female sports. Like
I'm aware, and trans women should, yeah, sure. Trans women being in these sports have benefits, right? There are benefits to those trans women being in sports, and the boogeyman that you're like talking about here that like TERFs have in their head that you don't seem to have is that the idea that like they're going to push women out. It's not the case. They'll push women out. They're not currently pushing women out. Women are still able to compete at the top level. Trans women are not currently like massively dominating. And the numbers of trans women are not large enough to even begin to push cis women out. If it becomes a problem, right? If it becomes an issue, and like we have like so much social acceptance that trans women begin to sort of like begin to come close even to overrepresenting themselves, I'd even grant to you the idea we could change the levels then even. But right now, as it stands, there's no reason to change the ability for trans women to go into sports. And it seems like you even like grant the idea that it's not currently a problem. You just think it'll be a future problem.
I don't even know if it's a problem, but I already agree that there is a problem right now. You just don't think that that is a problem. The problem right now is that I've said it a million. I think we're kind of looping on this. I don't know if you want to do a Q&A or...
The problem you have is
we can get into closing statements at this point. Since you can get the last word and say your closing statement right now, and then we can move on to Destiny, and then we can get into my questions and then audience questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Destiny, for showing up. I guess the argument of like trans women pushing cis women out. I don't think that the biological unfairness argument makes too much sense, given that like it obviously the point of these sports is about the social acceptance. We're introducing an unfairness by allowing people who are like biologically less fit to compete with other people who are biologically less fit. I don't think there are some groups of these people who are biologically advantaged is significant enough to justify pushing that group of people out entirely. If there was like a 30-foot tall woman or something, I'd understand this, right? We wouldn't want her competing in basketball. She just like pick the ball up and put it in the hoop, right? It wouldn't be fair. It would just ruin the sport. But I don't think the biological advantages that trans women have warrants calling that an unfairness. I think it's just an advantage, right? I think that like sports is a competition of biological advantage, so it's reasonable to keep them in.
All right, Destiny, you have the floor.
My brain is still too small to understand any of like the social push, whatever factors or whatever. I mean, it seems like we both acknowledge that trans women have a biological edge on cis women that is directly related to sex, which is what the whole point of the divisions is to separate out. And as long as that advantage exists, it feels like that's unfair and it threatens the competitive integrity of cis women's sports. And that even if it's not a problem right now, although I don't know if we could say it's a problem right now when fucking half the high schools across the country seem to be filing lawsuits and shit related to this, and we already have one NCAA champion that's a woman's swimmer, I guess, related to this. I don't think that like we should just wait and see what happens when we both agree that there is like a competitive advantage on the trans woman side. And I think that if it does start to happen, if it gets more extreme, I don't think it's going to be a thing that we can ever put back in the box. Like once we get to a point to where trans women are widely accepted in cis women's sports or women's sports, and it continues to grow, nobody's going to be comfortable saying like, okay, well, we need to get rid of some of these records and we need to take some of these things back and we need to roll trans people's participation. That's not going to go back. That would never happen. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we do things a little bit here differently on the Crucible. The debate is officially over. It's over. And now we get to, as moderators, in this case, just me, myself, get to interact with both debaters with some questions that we have. I only have 2 questions because I wrote down a lot of questions that the audience has, and I don't want to take up too much more of Destiny's time. Destiny, by the way, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on to the channel. We very much appreciate you coming on. I won't lie. You coming on to any channel definitely helps it grow. And I can tell you right now as the co-owner of this channel, we will not backstab you or really stab you in the face like some of the other streamers have done. Obviously, you've seen over the week. So right now, I'm going to concentrate on you, Destiny, for my first question. And it's really not that hard. I think we might actually be in a lot of agreements here. You stated that men dominantly, unilaterally in endurance sports just take over. You then stated that all these changes are done at the expense of women, putting trans women into women's sports. I'm just trying to figure out what is the difference between your argument and that of the turf right-wing women's argument
for keeping sports separated, for having a protected space for cis women's sports.
Yeah, I don't see a difference in your argument and the turf right-wing woman argument.
It's probably the same, I would imagine, for this case, right?
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to clarify that. So you would say I think in the past you would say everybody thought they were stupid, crazy, and they're overcompensating, but time has proven them true, right?
No, I think that they have one position that I happen to agree with. I'm sure there are probably things that Nazis say that I would probably agree with. There are probably things that communists say that I would agree with. And there's a lot of things liberals say that I agree with. Just because I happen to agree with one position that somebody states doesn't mean that I wholesale, like explicitly endorse that entire movement.
Right. Not that they're completely right, but yeah, here is one of their arguments. And then to Synth, my last question would be to you. How do you control for people doing / saying the necessary things in order to just get into the position they want to? The best one I could really reference is Dylan Burns. He says he's gay, but then we find out that he's actually, smashing biological women in the background. How do you see that like not being controlled for in sports, where it's like, oh, I am a woman, but really, I just wanted to make sure that I could get the bag and participate in sports.
Sorry, your question is Dylan Burns says he's gay?
Well, Dylan Burns says
I
he's
missed
gay,
it.
but there's a controversy where it was confirmed that he was actually with a biological woman, right? So that to me sounds like a hustle. He was just saying, I'm gay in order to get clout and attain more viewers on his channel. Just like a man who says I'm a woman in order to play in sports and dominate, where he wouldn't really dominate in the actual biological men's sports, and now he gets paid a lot of money how would you compensate for this?
I think as it currently exists, it's not likely to be the case that like we have a bunch of trans women competing in the in cis women's sports. I don't think it's like a thing worth controlling for. We don't have a lot of like secret cis men who are pretending to be trans women and taking hormones competing in it. I don't think it's likely to be worth controlling for. I don't know, Destiny, do you agree or disagree?
I don't know what people do in the future. I don't know. I would think it wouldn't happen, but like I hear crazy stories about people like being really competitive in athletic events, so I have no idea.
Okay.
Understood. And then we can switch over to audience questions at this time. Made by Jim Bob. Thank you for your $9 or your $10, really. Can either of you name a biological female athlete who identifies as a man and outperforms men in a given sport?
A biological female that identifies as a man, like a trans man?
Yes.
Yeah,
no, I don't think trans women are largely competitive, and I don't think trans women. We never got to the part trans men. I don't think that trans men will ever be competitive in sports, but I don't think anybody cares about men ever, like cis men or trans men. So we just ignore that completely. But trans men, if you decide to include trans women with cis women, then you're going to have to include trans men with cis men, and trans men will just never win anything because you can't overcome a female puberty like that. I don't think, unless you transition or get puberty blockers before puberty.
I actually agree with Destiny here about like it seems the society doesn't care too much about men, and I think a lot of society views trans women as men, and that's kind of like a lot of the reason why we seem to completely undervalue the huge benefits I think we could get here. Also, to maybe answer the Jim Bob's question as well. No, I can't name a single biologically female athlete who identifies as a man at all. So not really, no.
Wait, so what do you care about the social factors of like trans men never being competitive in sports and competing with cis men, or?
I think it's bad, but I think it's still the case that like we could probably increase the social benefits there, and I don't think keeping trans people in a separate league will ever really help that. I think we have to do the best we can with the options we have.
Okay.
Understood. Next question. Again, another $5 from Jim Bob. We seriously thank you for your donation, sir. Appreciate it. Anything helps the channel out. If men can compete against women in pro arm wrestling, should points only be awarded when they snap the radius or ulna of their female opponent?
Good one.
Okay. Obviously, that wasn't a serious question. No one wants to take that one on. Unless do either of you want to interact?
Well, it was a joke question. I don't know what I'm
supposed to say. I thought so.
Yeah, epic. I agree.
Gotcha. Destiny. Trans kids would not exist if it weren't for women backing it. It's always the mothers pushing trans kids. Shouldn't we let them lie in the bed they have made?
When I think of like social prescriptions or like policies that I have, I'm not like a spite-driven 400-pound fucking loser on Twitter thinking about it. So like when I think of policy positions, I don't think of like, should somebody lay in the bed that they made? That sounds stupid. Whoever does that should like log off and go talk to some real human beings. No.
Understood. And since, do you want to interact with that at all?
Sure. I don't think that's the justification I would give for this topic. I mean, I guess I end up agreeing with the conclusion, but I don't agree with your the justification here. I think it'd be interesting to talk about though. Rachel, let me know.
Understood. Next one coming from Rachel as well. Does Destiny believe gender is a social construct and a choice? If so, how does he reconcile trans rights with women's rights?
So if we agree with the like distinction between gender and sex, of which there seems to be like decent evidence for, I mean, asking if something is socially constructed, like technically everything is socially constructed. There's not like it, like in nature, there's not like a writing on our genome that says like female or male. Like we group traits how we want to, and then we categorize them how we want to. Largely for like most species, we tend to group things by like male or female. But I mean, like these categories are all like constructed. They don't exist like outside of like human understanding. So, insofar as that, like, I don't know, I just think it's kind of a silly question. For the thing, like, how do you reconcile, like, if somebody has like the gender of woman and like, I guess like the sex of man is what we're talking about. So like trans people in general. I don't know. I mean, like I push for societies that can be as inclusive as possible, but we have to recognize that there's going to be some biological realities relating to the bodies that people inhabit. So even if I am in favor of like trans people existing and trans people having rights, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should erode the rights of cis people if there's going to be some sort of like contention between a biological sex and like your gender identity.
Gotcha. I almost missed it. History Speaks. Thank you for your $50 donation. That is awesome, sir. We appreciate it. To Synth, should trans women be permitted to compete in international sporting events, even though most countries reject the West's view of trans?
Yes, we have a... Sure. Yeah, no, the West has a lot of social... we have a lot of social influence, I think, over countries broadly. So I think, yeah, we could pressure the international sporting events to letting this happen. I think it'd be ridiculous for them to keep trans women out. But they don't, right? Like the Olympics doesn't keep trans women out, to my knowledge at least. So I think absolutely the answer is just yes, flat out.
Gotcha. Destiny, do you want to interact with that part one of this question, or do you want me to move on part two?
I mean, if we feel like really strongly about something, I don't think we let other countries like change how we feel about it. Like, yeah, no, I mean, like we have a lot of with the fucking United States, like we can bully people around, even when it comes to social issues.
Understood. And then number two for Destiny, do you worry your arguments could be misused to disparage trans people in general?
I think that we need to do a little bit of a better job on the left of like engaging with reality and not being so afraid all the time of like not being 100% fucking like woke on every fucking thing we do. It leads you into these like really disastrous scenarios where you're like missing, you know, so much of reality and people are becoming more and more disconnected from your messages. So no, I don't worry about like, I'm going to lie or misrepresent some scientific fact that everybody that just looks around can see is true in order to make some argument that I think is socially good. I think that we have to acknowledge that reality exists and then you have to work around what reality is in order to make a better society, not pretend that reality is things that it isn't so we can pretend to have a better society.
Understood.
I actually agree with that. I just
oh, there you go.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with what Destiny said here. I think the playing into like the ed poll arguments in lieu of like actually just making a prescription that's better for society would be pretty negative. But I also think this could be applied to like the you're playing into turf arguments line. That's what I'll say on that though.
Understood. Next question from Elid. Sent, why trans women competing against men wouldn't be a step in the direction that he's arguing would be beneficial?
Trans women competing against because I think that it would we have these categories of like woman and man, right? And we're putting trans women in with the men category. I think it just reinforces our ideas that trans women are men. I guess that's the answer I'd give you.
Gotcha. Destiny, do you want to interact with that at all?
No, I'm good.
Understood. All right, moving on. This next one was from Rachel. I cut her name out. It's from Sense. Did I just watch you deconstruct 150 years of feminism and gender? Bring us back to biological sex and patriarchy. Is this horseshoe theory at work based? So
no, yeah, sure. It doesn't bring us back to biological sex and patriarchy. If you're asking if I'm like if I'm like I guess against most of the feminist consensus on this. Yeah, I think the feminist philosophy kind of sucks. I think that the ideas they have about gender kind of suck. I think most identity politics or intersectionalist philosophy are not like they're not great. Kimberly Crenshaw is kind of a dummy. Third wave feminism is pretty bad. Second wave feminism is worse. So I don't know. Maybe yes to the first part, no to the second part.
Understood. And last question I have marked down. I've been looking around for them, ladies and gentlemen, and this will be the last one. David, why does Synth not just want the trans to stay in their biological leads?
Because the ones you're talking about, I'm not gonna nitpick the language you're using. But the biological leagues that you're referring to, right? I think it's generally we view them socially as man and woman, and if we're putting trans women in the category of men, the same answer applies as earlier, which is that trans women being like seen as men would be harmful, and I think the affirmative action on the basis of sex is not going to solve that.
I found this next one. I think we already went through this one. Why do women's sports need to be competitive if they're not the best? Formula One, for example. Did we already go through this question? Oh no,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. So this one's for Destiny.
Why do women need to be competitive sports if they're not the best?
Mm-hmm.
I think just because it's good to have like an area of society where women can participate in sports. Like there's a gap between like what men and women are capable of physically. That like just because that gap exists biologically doesn't mean that we just say like, oh fuck women, you don't get to do sports, when women seem to like get a lot of enjoyment out of playing sports.
Right. I'm getting messages to check our other places where we get questions. Destiny, are you in a rush or anything?
Nope.
Okay, perfect. Just give me a second here. I'm checking. I'm not seeing anything else. Oh, wait. Here we go. The Crucible for Sense. Do you agree that any shared sports league will inevitably result in biological male dominance? So should women stay out of sports entirely, in your opinion?
I don't think it'll inevitably result in biological male domination. I guess it depends what you mean by domination. If you're saying it'll result in like the tops of the fields being men, I'd agree. If you're saying the entire field would be nothing but men, I disagree. So I wouldn't say women are staying entirely out of sports there. No, not really.
Gotcha. All right. I don't see anything else. I'm looking around. Oh, what is a woman? For
somebody, yeah, sure. Somebody who identifies with a social, certain female archetype or a certain female social archetype. Usually we'll call the female social archetype woman too, but they mean different things.
Okay. And then Destiny, is it bad to say biological adult female? Like,
no, I think like when it comes to like who identify, I mean, like what is a woman or what is a man? I think it's going to depend on like the context of what we're talking about, right? Like there are going to be biological realities related to like health or medicine that are going to be important to acknowledge. And then there are social factors related to the ways that people present themselves and how they're perceived in society. So yeah, like there are like people can, I know there are people that will hear an answer like that and they'll like and screech or whatever, but like realistically, the funniest example in the world of this was a Ben Shapiro podcast. I don't remember if he was talking about Caitlyn Jenner. I don't remember who he was talking about, but there was a trans person that Ben Shapiro was talking about, and he had to explicitly try so hard to misgender them because he didn't like them being trans. And it was funny because you could tell he had to work against his own like what his intuition was telling him. And I think that people would feel really similarly around a lot of like trans people, right? Like there was the Buck Angel guy. Like if you were to call him a her because you didn't believe in trans people, like everybody would look at you weird and you would have to try to go out of your way to do it. Or like Blair White. If you want to refer to like Blair White as like him, Blair White is a guy, him, you would have to try. You'd have to think about that a lot every time it comes across your mind because it's just not going to feel intuitive to you. So when people say like, what is a man or what is a woman? It's going to depend on the context that we're talking about. Like whether you're talking about like a medical health context or like a social context.
Gotcha. And I'm just curious, you can examine my lens, how I see it. Obviously, I'm a Christian. Does that have any bearing or weight in your mind? Like if that's a moral weight in my mind to like respect how God has like ordained things that I should, label it that way?
Absolutely not.
No. Okay, Destiny. The Crucible for Destiny. If there was some gene that gave cis women an advantage similar to trans women, would you want to exclude them from women's sports?
Was this for Steven?
It's for you.
It's for you.
I think that we've accepted that there is a wide variety of different types of men and different types of women, but we've just grouped it around men and women for sports. So finding one or two genes that changes that probably wouldn't change that. But I mean, I guess if people wanted to draw up like totally different divisions later on, they could, but I don't foresee that ever happening. I don't think that could happen.
Gotcha. All right. We got a super chat that came in from Gohano Bento for $5. We appreciate that donation, sir. Should women have separate teams for League of Legends? And are women the reason why you haven't succeeded?
I don't have a strong opinion on the esports stuff. I think that gets a little bit more hairy. And no, it's AD mids and jungles are the reason why I haven't succeeded. Those two groups.
Gotcha. All right. I think that is the last one. Thank you so much, Destiny, once again for coming on. We very much appreciate you. And did you have any parting words that you want to shout yourself out? Well, everybody knows you're the king of the internet. Everybody knows where to find you, but I'm sure you want to plug yourself one more time.
Sure. I'm youtube.com/Destiny. Wow.
All right. And Synth, do you want to plug yourself? Obviously,
sure,
this is your home, but if you want to hit him with any of your social media.
Sure. The Crucible is where I do most of my debates at, but I'm also on YouTube at youtube.com/SINTHE. It's spelled like Synth. It's spelled pronounced Synth.
Gotcha. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming here and witnessing this debate. This is the Crucible, where we try and put as best we can, neutral battleground for the truth to be fought over. Thank you so much. Have a good night.